convoy at sea, one of the lifelines upon which the United Nations war effort relied. Obviously, the world's battlefronts must be kept constantly supplied with food and materials of all kinds.
Le ravitaillement convoyé en Atlantique jusqu'au Royaume-Uni a joué un rôle décisif dans la victoire contre l'Allemagne nazie. Les récits des convois de l'Atlantique Nord et des marins héroïques défiant les sous-marins allemands, les tempêtes et le temps glacial font désormais partie de l'identité britannique. Des récits maintes fois repris. Ce que l'on sait moins, c'est qu'1 sur 7 de ces marins marchands ayant risqué leur vie sur ces convois périlleux étaient chinois. Et quand la guerre a pris fin, leurs courageux sacrifices furent récompensés par la trahison.
When we got to the end of the war and the Englishmen were coming back and wanted the jobs back, they had a secret Home Office meeting where it was discussed in Whitehall what to do about the Chinese merchant seamen, and they decided they would round them up and forcibly repatriate them.
That particular night, they went round all the sort of the chip shops, the dry cleaners, and the mahjong place where they used to play mahjong, the games places, picked them all up, put them into vans, drove them down to the docks, took them out into the Mersey, put them into boats.
Voici l'histoire d'une tragédie honteuse vieille de 70 ans qui vient seulement d'être reconnue par le gouvernement britannique et pour laquelle aucune excuse officielle n'ont été présentées. Une histoire de vie meurtrie par l'absence et le mensonge.
I think it's what happened to our parents, the children that were left behind, that is the biggest travesty. You know, they are British children that the British government knew full well existed. They knew they'd deported the dads and left the mums without means to pay the bills. And yet that didn't bother them any more than it did to deport the men.
There's a good chance you have close family in Singapore, isn't there? Your dad probably, maybe, hopefully, had a new life and a new start in another country.
Well, yes. Yeah. I hope he did.
So you may have half-sisters or half-brothers.
Yes, I'd like to know.
D'âges avancés, les enfants de ces marins cherchent des réponses avec un sentiment d'urgence croissante.
You spent 20 years of your life trying to get to the bottom of this story. What is it that drives you? What is it that motivates you?
For the children who were left behind to know about their fathers who disappeared.
If you could meet him now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd give him a big hug first and say, I'm sorry that this happened to you. And we couldn't do anything about it. But we can now. We want the truth. Own up to what they did. And let us then settle. We're not got that many years left in us. But we just want the truth.
Liverpool in northwest England is still one of Britain's biggest and busiest ports. During the Second World War, it was the base for those extraordinarily dangerous North Atlantic convoys in which thousands of sailors lost their lives. It was also the home base for Chinese seamen who crewed them. They sailed down this passage. The British government recruited thousands to help the war effort and was clear about their courage and the importance of their contribution.
Thousands of Chinese seamen now serving with the Allied merchant navy, bringing food to Britain, munitions from America, cargoes from Africa and the East, and getting the convoys through to Russia, India, Australia.
Le gouvernement britannique produisit ce film en 1944 pour promouvoir leur rôle.
But in the West, her men fight on the merchant navy front, shoulder to shoulder in the greatest battle of naval history, alongside their British seamen comrades. They too brave the torpedoes and the bombs and the mines, making history under fire.
Mais dès la guerre terminée, cette belle camaraderie fut oubliée. Les autorités britanniques montrèrent un autre visage. Les marins chinois n'étaient plus les bienvenus même si grand nombre d'entre eux avaient fondé une famille avec leurs femmes britanniques. En l'absence d'un droit de séjour légal, les liens affectifs et familiaux pesaient peu, alors que des milliers de marins étaient systématiquement expulsés d'un coup de balai.
Before 43?
No.
Well, I don't know, it's his second deportation. Oh, he deported to Shanghai on that one, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Brian Flower est l'une des victimes de cet abrupt changement de politique. Il était encore un bébé lorsque son père, Zai Fa Chao, disparut. Sa mère se trouva démunie et il atterrit dans un orphelinat séparé de ses 3 frères et sœurs. Brian a maintenant près de 80 ans. C'est sa fille, Kellyanne, petite fille de Chao, qui poursuit sa quête de la vérité.
So what do we know about Grandad?
Not a lot, really. I mean, we've got a name. We know he worked for Blue Funnel and he was a merchant seaman. We know he was deported and that it was done secretly. So the first time nobody really understood what had happened, just a lot of the community had vanished.
The decision to throw out the sailors is well documented in Britain's National Archives. The name civil servants gave this original file leaves no doubt how they viewed the people who just months previously they called heroes. It's called compulsory repatriation of undesirable Chinese seamen. The officials call them surplus to requirements and talk repeatedly of bulk clearances and the hundreds of wives and girlfriends they would be separated from. Well, one civil servant wrote that many were of the prostitute class. It seems extraordinary that these men who put their lives in danger for Britain were then deported. Why were they deported?
It just looks like a racist decision. There's no other real conclusion to be had. They were called undesirables. They referred to them as, criminal class, and they made some pretty nasty remarks about the wives. One of the papers says they were prostitute class. So they were just classed as nothing, really. And when the end of the war came and they felt they'd served their purpose, they didn't even feel a need to be nice to them or thankful to them for the job they've done. They just rounded them all up and deported them.
Liverpool abrite l'un des plus anciens quartiers chinois d'Europe qui s'est développé au XIXe siècle grâce aux marins chinois faisant partie des équipages de bateaux commerciaux de Chine et d'Asie. Ce pub est situé au cœur du quartier chinois, c'est là que les marins socialisaient ou encore se renseignaient sur les potentiels employeurs. La compagnie Blue Funnel, qui employait la plupart d'entre eux, avait ses bureaux à côté du pub. Depuis ses prestigieux bureaux près du port, Blue Funnel dominait le commerce maritime vers et depuis les ports chinois et asiatiques.
So, white gloves time. These
Absolutely.
are so precious, we have to
Gloves up.
put these on.
As yours.
And the reason is all of the oil everybody has on their hands and the chance
Yeah,
of...
the residual oil can sort of pass on and that can ruin the prints.
Les vies de ces marins chinois pendant les années de guerre ont été magnifiquement documentées dans une série de photos de Bert Hardy, l'un des photographes britanniques les plus réputés de l'époque.
So he was going into these boarding houses, places where people had to basically wait for the next ship to turn up. So he was interested in the living conditions of people who were calling a city a home.
What's extraordinary about this is that, you see all of these Chinese names on ships' lists, and in many cases, not even names, but they're referred to almost as cargo. Mm-hmm. And then finally, you see these men's faces.
And it completely shifts the portrayal of these people,
Yeah.
A lot of these people will have been living on ships. This might not have been sort of a strange living situation for them. You can see that these people are at rest. You can see here sort of smoking a pipe and maybe making some tea. We've got sort of like reading materials, you know, they're interested in local news. They're very much sort of like forming a community here in Liverpool.
There's something very moving about going through all of these pictures of these people and knowing now their faces, but not knowing their names. We don't know their names, do we?
No, we don't.
Pour le gouvernement britannique, un marin en particulier incarnait le courage de ces héros chinois.
He's Poon Lim, Chinese merchant seaman. His ship was sunk in the Atlantic, but he managed to swim to a raft, and on this he was adrift for 133 days. For 4 months he lived completely alone in the midst of the ocean, on a piece of wood 6 feet square. He fought all the elements, hunger, thirst, and despair, and won.
Just months later, British officials wanted to get rid of thousands of Poon Lim's fellow sailors. But at the key meeting of October 1945, civil servants were told they only had legal grounds to deport 18. So they hatched a plan to change the rules under which the sailors could land in Liverpool, in effect to trip them up.
The landing conditions will be varied so as to require the man to leave by the theoretical sailing date of the ship. At the end of the day, on that date, the ship will leave the dock but will wait in the river for 2 more days before actually sailing. We shall be grateful if as soon as possible after midnight on the theoretical sailing date, you would telegraph to us the names of the men who have failed to join the ship in accordance with their landing conditions. You will then be able to enforce the orders by placing the men on board the ship before she sails 2 days after the theoretical sailing date.
So they changed the dates when men were required to report to a ship, either forcing them to go on board or, if they failed to, giving officials grounds to make legal orders against them. This is your dad?
Yes. My dad was named N.G. Loy, and he was 29 and he was a bachelor.
June Caddick possède une preuve officielle du mariage de ses parents. Mais ce n'est que lorsqu'elle a dû fournir son certificat de naissance à la veille de son propre mariage en 1963 qu'elle a réalisé que son père faisait peut-être partie des hommes rapatriés.
Well, this is the birth certificate which revisits some of these facts.
Yes.
But not all of them. Because here we have the story of your birth, your mum, but not your dad.
But not my dad, no.
Why?
I don't know what happened to that.
It's almost as if he's been
obliterated,
whitewashed out of the story.
Yes, yes.
He's unpersoned, which is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is.
So they were married, and then he's deported from Liverpool.
Like thousands of other Chinese, they all got rounded up and sent back.
But they were married.
Well, there was no one to fight for them in them days, like there is now. And I don't know what happened after that. All I know is when I was older, I heard he'd sent a letter to my mother, said he was destitute and he wanted money. But I don't know what happened, whether she sent the money or what.
So what do you know of him other than that?
There's nothing I know about him, nothing at all.
If you could meet your dad now, I wonder what you would say to him.
It upset me.
He'd probably be very proud of you, wouldn't he?
Probably.
Mais pourquoi, hormis les préjugés raciaux et le snobisme, les autorités britanniques étaient-elles si décidées à se débarrasser des marins chinois?
What are you seeing here?
We have a lot of memories of from older people as they were kids playing on bomb sites, and that was a big theme that came through the memories shared as part of the exhibition, playing on bomb sites. And of course, all that new housing some of it wasn't built until the late 50s, so there were still lots of bomb sites still across the city for many, many years, and this is a big feature of lots of people's childhoods, playing on.
Liverpool avait été lourdement touché par les bombes pendant la guerre, et les documents du ministère de l'Intérieur montrent que les autorités municipales convoitaient les logements occupés par les Chinois pour les Britanniques ayant perdu les leurs et pour les soldats retournant du front.
Around 4,000 people very sadly lost their lives, 10,000 homes were completely destroyed, and 70,000 people were left homeless.
Alors, les marins chinois ont été expulsés en partie pour aider à régler la crise du logement après-guerre.
You say that Liverpool lost tens of thousands of houses in the bombing. Was it justified to expel the relatively small number of Chinese sailors who were here to try and solve that problem?
Well, it sounds very much like a justification, doesn't it, to get rid of the Chinese men. Obviously, it was such a small percentage of all those homeless people requiring homes. I can't imagine it would have made much of a difference.
Why did they do it? Why expel these men?
If they were using that as an excuse, it was a solid one to go with. There's no disputing that there was this massive acute housing shortage. But of course, in reality, it really wouldn't have made that much difference or impact, would it?
Une autre explication est la volonté de libérer des emplois pour les Britanniques. C'est une explication que Keith Coughlin, dont le père a été déporté, ne peut accepter.
Do you have any sympathy with the political landscape in which this decision was taken? Britain was broke after the Second World War. Cities like Liverpool had been bombed, housing was in short supply. The returning army needed jobs. Do you understand why this decision, this policy was made? Do you have any sympathy with it?
No, because the Chinese were not taking any jobs in the English or the British industry. They worked for the Blue Funnel, and the only people that worked for the Blue Funnel were people from China or the deck officers, which were British. So they weren't taking anyone's job whatsoever. They weren't taking anyone's houses because the people who lived in these houses accommodated the Chinese people as people that could live there and pay their rent. So it was of no consequence. That is just a way of saying, let's get rid of them.
United will never be defeated. The Dockers united will never be defeated. The Dockers united.
Comme le montre cette récente grève, les dockers et marins de Liverpool ont une longue histoire de lutte syndicale.
So no, we will not accept a pay cut. Shame on you. Shame on you.
Et c'est un indice sur ce qui aurait pu être une autre motivation du gouvernement britannique. Malgré avoir bravé les mêmes dangers, les marins chinois étaient beaucoup moins payés que leurs camarades britanniques et ne recevaient pas de primes de guerre jusqu'à ce qu'ils se mettent en grève en 1942. Les compagnies marchandes souhaitaient les récupérer à moindre coût au prix de la main-d'œuvre asiatique, s'assurant qu'ils ne pourraient s'engager que sur des navires en Chine et à Singapour. Entre les mesures gouvernementales et les pressions des compagnies, les marins furent pris en tenaille, contraints de partir d'une manière ou d'une autre.
When they couldn't coerce the men into going, these documents show they took direct and brutal action, sending in Britain's political police force to round them up.
In the company of Sergeant Jones of the Liverpool Special Branch, 2 whole days were spent in intensive search of approximately 150 pool boarding houses, private boarding houses and private houses.
Pendant un entretien de 2010, lors duquel elle a préféré garder l'anonymat, la femme d'un marin a raconté comment on avait fait disparaître son mari.
One day, I remember he came in and he said he was going to sign on a ship. I think my son was about 8 months old, and he said sometimes they could sign on and go straight onto the ship. So he went. He never came back, so I thought, he's got the ship. So I waited for a week or so, and then I went up to the officers to see if there'd been any half pay left for me, because the women used to get what they called half pay then. And Mr. Smith, who was the boss of the office, he said to me, what ship is he on? I said, well, he came up to sign on. I said, he didn't come back. So he said, oh, so he got all the forms. He said, well, what? His name's not on any of the ships. He's never got a ship from here. He said, the name's not on. So I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I don't know. But apparently, he must have been in one of them. Apparently, the emigration or somebody came and took a lot of the Chinese out of the office, out of the cafes, and put them on a ship, and they went, and nobody heard anything about them. And I presume he was one of them, because I never heard or seen a thing from then till now. Nothing. Everybody was too busy getting sorted out after the war, and they were rebuilding, and everybody was trying to get their lives together. What did a few Chinese matter? It's awful to think that they could just do something like that and nobody cared. But they didn't care. Nobody cared. Nobody bothered. Nobody even looked into it. It wasn't even, you know, nothing was made public. It was just all hushed up. It was all hushed up. They couldn't do it now and get away with it. But they did it then and got away with it.
Ce sont dans des maisons comme ça, aux abords du quartier chinois, que les hommes étaient arrêtés, embarqués dans des véhicules et emmenés au port. Comme en attestent ces empreintes digitales sur les manifestes, grand nombre d'entre eux ne savaient pas écrire l'anglais. Ayant interdiction de quitter le navire, sans pouvoir contacter leur famille, ces hommes disparaissaient.
And in an age before computers and widespread use of telephones, these men simply disappeared and couldn't be found. They vanished.
No, that was it. That was the end of contact. I mean, most of the Chinese seamen probably couldn't write English for a start, so the idea of them writing letters, the wives had lost the homes, so they're not even in the addresses that the seamen were present at. And for years, lots of these wives didn't even know that their husband had been deported. He just vanished. So there was quite a lot of bitterness with some of the wives. They felt they'd been abandoned at the worst period in history.
Au fur et à mesure que l'histoire des marins se fait jour, leurs enfants et petits-enfants s'organisent pour enquêter et demander des excuses officielles. Pour les frères Joe et John, le ressentiment ne vient pas seulement de la perte d'un père, c'est aussi la tromperie dont eux et leur mère ont été victimes, car ils ont longtemps cru que leur père les avait abandonnés.
When you've been left, or you're always yearning for your father, and it was so awkward to not have one. Now, I was led to believe that my father left my mother and she was angry at him. No, since then, I found out he was shanghaied, meaning he was deported.
At 71, I decided, well, I had no allegiance to this man. Why should I have allegiance to this man when he left 4 children in the UK? Why should I have an allegiance to him? So I deposed my name from Joseph Phillips C to Joseph Phillips and knocked the Z and D off.
Like my brother says, yeah, he changed his name, and I understand that. But for me, C is everything. and I'm very, very proud of my name.
You talked of anger. Have you changed your view of your father?
As the understanding starts coming out, of course I've changed it, because if he was taken from us, and we don't know the full truth of it because it's very hard to establish where he's gone. I do ancestry, and when I get past to my father, it becomes a block. Know where he is or what he's gone. So no, I'm not angry at him anymore. What I want now is the truth. It needs to be exposed. The injustice needs to be put right.
What do you want?
I want to know who my father is. I want to know who my Chinese family is, who they are, where they are, because they're a missing part of me. They're a missing part of my family.
If you could meet him now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd give him a big hug first and say, I'm sorry that this happened to you. We couldn't do anything about it. But we can now. We want the truth. Own up to what they did and let us settle. We're not got that many years left in us. But we just want the truth.
So what does this say?
This is just my birth certificate. I was born on the 8th of February 1945, Smithdown Road, Judith, a girl, to Changu Shang.
So Changu Shang is your dad?
Yeah, is my dad. Maureen Duddy.
Le père de Judy Kinin est l'un de ces milliers de marins jugés indésirables.
He was a ship splitter. He couldn't write English, so he had to have that marked by somebody. And the 28th of March 1945.
Elle n'avait qu'un an quand son père a été rapatrié.
That's my mum.
She's beautiful, isn't she?
Dad.
Yeah, he's a good
now,
looking
on
boy.
the back of here, when he disappeared, she'd wrote on the back of it, "To my darling, joyful wishes you to keep with happy. From Miss Mooring and baby darling, you have now left me. It is 10 months."
God, it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's a good-looking bloke, so he meets this beautiful woman in Liverpool.
Yeah. And she said she just thought the world of him. Just thought the world of him, you know.
So your dad is seized and put on a ship, and we don't know what happened next.
Never know.
What effect did it have on your mother?
Terrible, because all her friends said just stress and anxiety was all. It took her a couple of years to get herself back to normal.
And she never really knew what happened.
She never knew what happened, so she couldn't tell me. Because that second photograph she sent out with a sailor once, because she thought he'd just left her.
And he
didn't just leave her at all. And it came back and said, well, we can't find him.
She clearly loved him.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, she did. Everyone says that.
La plupart des hommes furent contraints de s'engager dans l'équipage, d'autres étaient passagers et certains furent même déclarés comme cargaison sans nom. Et quand des noms sont inscrits, ce sont de mauvaises transcriptions anglaises. La difficulté majeure dans la recherche de ces marins est que la Chine était à l'époque dans un état de guerre civile. Alors le sort de nombreux hommes après leur retour en Chine demeure un mystère, en particulier à Shanghai.
This is a picture of my dad, and it's actually the earliest photograph we have of him, because when his dad was deported, my dad ended up in an orphanage. So he's this age when he's returned home to his mum. So apart from not being able to identify my granddad, we don't even have a baby picture of my own father. And as you can see in this picture, he's got a borrowed jacket on and probably no trousers, and he's sat in front of a table, just borrowed clothes to take the shot, really.
So, and there are no photographs of him as a baby. That's
not a single one. This is where it starts. This is the first picture we have of him at all.
And nothing of Grandad?
Not a single thing, except his name on a wedding certificate. We haven't got any pictures. We don't have a seaman's pouch. We don't have any family photographs. So yeah, this is our earliest start of our family memories, really.
À cœur déterminé, rien n'est impossible. Keith a fini par découvrir quelques informations sur son père, Sung Kwai-sing.
I often wondered why my children were so brilliantly clever and where they got it from. And it turns out that my father, although he worked in the engine room, he was an interpreter between the Chinese and the English officers. He was a doctor of medicine, and because of the war and the invasion by Japan, China was a very poor country, so he tracked from Shanghai to India and joined the Blue Funnel Shipping Company.
Keith n'a jamais rencontré son père, mais il y a 12 ans, il a découvert qu'il avait de la famille en Chine, en recevant la visite d'un neveu chinois, fils d'un demi-frère que Keith ignorait avoir.
He was my brother's son, and we met. He came to Liverpool, and we went out for the evening, and he told me about my two sisters and my brother. He was my brother's son, who was training to be a lawyer, and had come to Manchester to do a special course, and then was flying back to Japan in a few days' time. So I met him.
What did you say to him?
You know, I didn't say too much, but I just asked him how things were and one thing and another, and that my brother wanted to come over here, and I said, well, I'll try and see what I can do, but the mystery deepens. He disappeared.
Your dad will be proud of all the work that you've done, surely.
I would hope so.
The law at the time meant British-born women who married foreign men automatically lost their citizenship and so any rights to government support. Although that was changed by the post-war Labour government, many women were left destitute when their husbands were repatriated, sometimes with awful consequences for families. How do you find the last remains of someone who is buried in an unmarked grave?
When you access the death certificates, you can also access a burial certificate, and that will give you the cemetery and the grave number or the plot number where they're buried. So Havan was buried in the pauper's grave along with another 43 people.
Esther Beddoe, qui était mariée au marin Chao Ha Wong, n'a jamais pu se permettre d'acheter une pierre tombale pour son fils mort, encore bébé, en 1945. Ce n'est que récemment que la petite fille d'Esther a pu identifier la tombe et y mettre une pierre.
This is my mum's brother, Esther Beddoe, and Chao Ha Wong's son, Havan Beddoe. His name is written in English there, Havan, but he's named after his father, which is Ha Wong.
Lorsque le mari d'Esther a été rapatrié, son fils est mort et elle a placé sa fille, encore bébé, à la charge de ses parents.
I don't think Esther ever recovered from losing Chao Ha Wong and from losing his son. She gave my mum up to her mum, and she died when she was 30, Esther. And she never knew that he'd been repatriated forcibly. and it's a little too late for Esther. She felt that she couldn't keep my mum because she was an unmarried mother and she was mixed race, and so she gave my mum up for adoption. She died very young. She was anorexic, which is a sign of bad mental health, very bad mental health, and she died by the time she was 30. So for Esther, that's too late to put that right for her. She died thinking and feeling she'd been abandoned. For my mum, it meant that she grew up without a father. She's never had a photograph of her dad. She's never had a relationship with her dad because she was brought up by a grandma and granddad who were born in 1896 and 1898. They were very traditional English, and they kind of closed ranks around her to keep her safe and try and harden her to the racism that she was having to face at the time.
What happened to the women and children who were left behind?
Overnight, the breadwinner's gone. They can't pay the bills, they can't feed the children. Those that were married have been given alien status for marrying a foreign man anyway.
What does that mean?
That they're not entitled to services, that they're not traditional British citizens anymore. They take on the status of their husbands. So it was overnight destitution is what happened to the people that were left behind, the wives and the children. And some mothers managed to keep it together and they managed to feed the children and get through them years. Other mothers didn't. Lots of the children went into care. My dad went into an orphanage, and I mean, my dad's quite lucky. He was returned to his mum at 11. There's many others went into the care system who had no one to be returned to. So there's possibly people out there that don't even know they're part of this story. Half Chinese, British people brought up in an orphanage, and they've got no idea that this is the set of circumstances that led to them being in orphanages in the first place.
Le ministère de l'Intérieur britannique a récemment réexaminé les dossiers des années 40 et admis que cette politique était motivée par des considérations raciales. Il a confirmé que plus de 8000 marins marchands chinois avaient été rapatriés, très souvent sans avoir le choix, et que des centaines d'entre eux s'étaient mariés avec des femmes britanniques. Un ministre a écrit « Je regrette vraiment que ceux qui ont servi dans la marine marchande pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale aient été traités ainsi. » Les déportations ont été effectuées sous un gouvernement travailliste. Certains des législateurs travaillistes d'aujourd'hui souhaitent que le gouvernement conservateur actuel, ainsi que les leaders de leur parti, présentent des excuses officielles.
When you look around the table, a lot of these people are very emotional and they're getting old. You're their last hope, really, aren't you?
Well, I think a number of people before me tried to get some justice for the families of the forcibly deported. And I'm going to make it my duty as the MP for this constituency to do everything that I can while I'm still the Labour MP. And if I'm re-elected in the next election, I will continue. You know, we mentioned at the meeting today that this injustice took place under a Labour-run government, you know, so to have a level of acknowledgement from our current party, you know, would be a step in the right direction.
Why do I think it happens? Ultimately through racism. And when it comes to East and Southeast Asian racism, the UK has been far behind acknowledging the level of racism that is levelled at Chinese people, East Asians and Southeast Asians. We saw the racism of old that saw these Chinese seamen deported rear its ugly head again over the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic. And what I want to ensure is that we learn from those past mistakes so that we do not continue to have resurgences of racism against our communities, because it hadn't gone away. It wasn't like COVID was something new. It was just like it was racism on steroids against us. Now, I have a little girl, and I don't want to see is that she is subjected to the same racism in this country that other generations have been as well.
La communauté chinoise de Liverpool aujourd'hui reste profondément immergée dans la culture chinoise. Mais de nombreux descendants des marins déportés luttent encore pour savoir où est leur place, parce qu'on a coupé leur lien avec leur héritage chinois.
I feel like we've been robbed slightly of our heritage, and it's all to do with self-identity, so it matters. And when you don't look the same as other people, you don't quite fit in. There's a negative element there with the racism, and we've never had anything positive to readdress it and rebalance it. And so that's what I want for my mum. She's 76 and she's not getting any younger, and I wanted to have that photograph of her dad. I wanted to know what happened to him. I wanted to know if he did get married and have a family, and we hope he did, and he had a happy life.
It's my grandfather who was deported, but I've grown up in Britain in the 70s and 80s, and there's no getting away from the racism. My entire life, people say to me, where are you from? You're obviously not fully British. And then I'm left with that awkward position of, I actually don't know anything about my culture or my roots, or other than a sailor's name.
那些被要求離開的人們，他們不得不離去，在這個國家不再需要他們的時候。We'll never forget, for those requests to leave this country, they have to go. Because we don't need them anymore. The country don't need them anymore.
Ce mémorial aux marins a été approuvé par le conseil municipal de Liverpool en 2006 et reconnaît en partie le mal commis, en admettant qu'on leur a demandé de partir. De nombreuses voix de la communauté chinoise exigent une reconnaissance plus complète.
You need a new plaque, really, that's a bit more honest, don't you?
I would think so. I think if the Home Office accept the new wordings, we want to pacify, we want to work together, and that's what our children, our grandchildren in Liverpool wants. Those are the history. But accept these legacy has to be written like deportation, like they were rung up and taken back to China without any legal process. I think that's important.
What do you say to the people who might say this was all a very long time ago, you should simply just move on?
It might have been a long time ago, so there's been an injustice for a long time, and it's about time that people stood up and put it right.
What would they do if it was their father? You'd want to know. I don't care who you are. I feel as if no matter what, you'd want to know, if you could. You know, and they've been hiding it all these years. You know what I mean? I mean, say the way my husband passed away so quickly, that could happen to me and I'll never know. And I think that's what we're waiting for.
Are they just waiting for you all to die off?
I think so, yeah. Then they've got no one to commit to then, have they? It's hurtful though. Hurts.
A lot of people will say, look, the landscape in which these events unfolded was the chaos of a world war.
They could just apologise though, couldn't they? You know, to actually make people feel better. They could have just said, we're really sorry what happened. There's nobody alive who made those decisions. But we're still treating people who've worked for Britain like dirt and disregarding their entire lifetime spent in Britain and any family that they've built up. So I don't have any expectations that the government's going to do anything really except make a few noises. Like I say, they've not even apologised. That'd be a start.